If you learned about nutrition years ago, there's a good chance you're still following advice that no longer reflects what science actually shows. Many people continue to eat based on rules they were taught in school, saw on food pyramids, or heard repeated for decades. At the time, that guidance made sense. But nutrition science has moved forward and quietly, so have official guidelines. What makes this confusing is that the changes were not dramatic or headline-grabbing. There was no single announcement saying, "Everything you knew is wrong." Instead, guidance evolved gradually as evidence accumulated. As a result, many people never realized the rules had changed at all. One of the biggest shifts is that nutrition guidelines no longer focus primarily on calories. For a long time, calories were treated as the main driver of health and weight. Eat fewer calories, stay healthy. But large-scale research consistently showed that people eating similar calorie amounts could have very different health outcomes. Calories explained energy intake, but not disease risk. Today, health authorities place far greater emphasis on diet quality and food patterns. This means looking at what people eat most of the time, not just how much they eat. 2 meals with the same calories can affect blood sugar, hunger, inflammation, and long-term health in completely different ways. This insight reshaped nutrition guidance worldwide. Another outdated idea many people still follow is the fear of fat. For decades, low-fat eating was promoted as the safest option. While this reduced certain risks, it also led to unintended consequences. Many low-fat products replaced fat with sugar and refined carbohydrates, which often worsened blood sugar control and hunger. Modern guidelines no longer treat fat as the enemy. Instead, they focus on fat quality. Unsaturated fats from foods like fish, nuts, seeds, and plant oils are now recognized as supportive of heart health, while industrial trans fats and heavily processed fats are discouraged. Avoiding all fat is no longer considered healthy or necessary. Carbohydrates are another area where advice has changed. Old guidance often grouped all carbs together, encouraging people to limit them broadly. Today, experts clearly distinguish between whole food carbohydrates and refined ones. Whole grains, fruits, and legumes behave very differently in the body compared to refined starches and sugars. Cutting carbs indiscriminately is no longer recommended. Protein advice has also evolved. Protein was once treated mainly as a concern for athletes or bodybuilders. New research shows that adequate protein intake plays a key role in appetite regulation, metabolic health, and healthy aging. Guidelines now emphasize regular protein intake across meals, not just total daily amounts. Perhaps the most important change of all is the focus on food processing. Older advice looked mainly at nutrients, fat, sugar, salt, calories. Newer guidance recognizes that ultra-processed foods behave differently in the body, regardless of their nutrient labels. Diets high in ultra-processed foods are consistently linked to higher disease risk, even when calorie intake appears controlled. This is why many foods marketed as healthy still fail to support long-term health. Labels like low-fat, high-protein, or fortified do not change the underlying structure of highly processed products. Nutrition guidelines now encourage people to prioritize foods closer to their natural form rather than chasing specific nutrient claims. Another outdated belief is that healthy eating requires strict rules and constant discipline. Earlier advice often promoted rigid plans and avoidance lists. Current guidance recognizes that sustainability matters more than intensity. Diets that are calm, flexible, and repeatable outperform strict plans that rely on constant restraint. Health authorities now discourage extreme restriction because it often leads to cycles of dieting and rebound eating. This pattern is associated with worse long-term outcomes than steady, balanced habits. Eating well is no longer framed as a test of willpower, but as a process of building supportive routines. There has also been a shift away from moral language around food. Older advice often labeled foods as good or bad, clean or dirty. Modern guidelines focus on frequency and proportion instead. What matters is not whether you ever eat certain foods, but what makes up the majority of your diet. Another major change is the recognition that food does not exist in isolation. Sleep, stress, physical activity, and daily routines all influence how the body responds to food. Nutrition guidelines now reflect a more holistic view of health rather than treating food as a standalone solution. So why do so many people still follow old advice? Because nutrition messages stick. Once something is learned, it becomes familiar and comforting, even when it's outdated. Food pyramids, calorie charts, and low-fat slogans shaped habits that persist long after guidance has evolved. The problem is not that people are doing something wrong. It's that they're using an old map in a new landscape. The food environment has changed, lifestyles have changed, and science has advanced. Guidelines had to change too. Updating your understanding does not mean starting over. It means adjusting priorities, focusing less on numbers and more on patterns, less on restriction and more on nourishment, less on perfection and more on consistency. Modern nutrition guidance is quieter than diet trends, but it is far more reliable. It aims to reduce disease risk slowly, steadily, and sustainably. That may not sound exciting, but it works. If you're still eating based on rules you learned years ago, it may be time to reassess. Not because you failed, but because the science moved on. If you want more clear, evidence-based explanations without hype or confusion, feel free to follow along. Nutrition doesn't change to make life harder, it changes to make health easier when we're willing to update our thinking.